Dick Weiss, welcome to St. Louis Press Club's Hour in the Now series. Appreciate your taking the time to be a part of this. And I must say it's July 22nd, 2020. It's important to time date these. And how is your day today?
It's good. I'm in good shape and ready to rock and roll with you.
Yeah, wonderful. Please identify yourself formally, your position, and more specifically with regard to before Ferguson and beyond Ferguson.
Okay, well, I'm Richard H. Weiss, and I am a veteran journalist and worked almost my entire career in St. Louis, worked 30 years at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I am the founder of a racial equity storytelling project called Before Ferguson, Beyond Ferguson, which attempts to tell the stories of families in our region, African Americans who have strived over generations to gain their purchase on the American dream. And our latest project is around how African American families in 63106, the region's most vulnerable zip code, are coping with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, this is what our project here at the Press Club is about, focusing in the context of COVID and then, of course, following the death of George Floyd. I'd love to hear about your meetings during this time with your reporters, with your board. What is that all about? Would love to hear about those.
Sure. Well, I had been working over the last couple of years on our project, which is organized under the Before Ferguson, Beyond Ferguson, which is nonprofit. I should mention that. And we've been doing stories about every quarter on families, long-form stories, right up until January, February, and then COVID struck. And we decided that we needed to shift gears to address the pandemic and its dynamic and the devastation it was bringing to marginalized communities. And then we needed to write stories faster, maybe shorter, so they were more digestible. And so I gathered even more people to be involved with this. We have about 21 people now working on this in one form or another, journalists, photojournalists, videographers, presentation specialists, data analysts that help us. And my notion going in, and it's changed a little bit as we went along and learned things, was to focus on 63106, which was identified in the For Sake of All report, which was produced by Washington University's Brown School of Social Work and St. Louis University. They did a study and found that in 63106, which for people who are reasonably familiar with the area, is located near, includes the old Pruitt-Igoe site. It includes the property where the NGA will be building its facility, and it includes a number of affordable housing projects developed by McCormick Baron Salazar. And beyond those housing projects, there is not much housing that is very solid. So it's a very compromised area, also in terms of health, social determinants of health, higher rates of diabetes, asthma, heart disease than in other areas. And the bottom line for this report essentially was that in 63106, the average life expectancy for a child born in 2010 was going to be 67 years old. Let's look at one digit off. 63105, as most folks know, is Clayton, probably the wealthiest zip code in our region. The average life expectancy is 85, 67 versus 85, 18 years difference. So we decided to focus our attention on families in this neighborhood in 63106 and to see how they were doing. And the idea was a lot of stories, uh, the Post-Dispatch and other media outlets in town do many stories on vulnerable populations. What was going to make this project unique, at least in my view, was that we were not going to do one story on a family, a kind of a drive-by, but to write one story after another on these families, about one every couple of months, to check in on them to see how they were doing, because as we know this pandemic is rises and falls, and it has ramifications that we can only begin to wonder about at any given time. So, for instance, Aisha Sultan wrote a story for the project that appeared in the Post-Dispatch about a woman who has 3 children, was homeschooling them, and that story appeared about a couple months ago, I guess, or 6 weeks ago, and she's pregnant. So the next story is going to be, well, what happened when the baby arrived, and how's that going to be handled, and
In
so
a
on.
way, you're addressing the running story that so often is missing nowadays. In this in the local environment, journalism environment. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say that, you know what, I think all of our media partners, and I should mention who they are. Our articles have appeared in the St. Louis American, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Riverfront Times, St. Louis Magazine, on St. Louis Public Radio. We have a new partner that will be joining us at KTRS, and they all do great jobs. They cover lots of things, and as you know, the business model for journalism is broken, and some might even say shattered, and so they can only get to so much. And so what we're doing uh, is providing them with some extra coverage, unique coverage at no cost to them. Um, Also had the side benefit is some of our workers, some of the people on our team uh, were furloughed, and so this provided a little extra something, a very tiny stimulus package, if you will, for journalism and journalists in this town.
Mhm. Speak to your business model, if you would, please.
Sure. Basically, it's pretty simple, although I must say I'm on a learning curve. I've never run a nonprofit. I had to learn how to even apply to be a nonprofit. And essentially, what we do is we go out into the community, and tell people what we're about. I've already kind of articulated our mission,
Right.
and we ask people to donate. And we've had $5 donors, and we've had I think our largest donation is $10,000, and they come from people I know. I guess I'm trading on my privilege. I know people who have money, and I ask them for it. Not shy about that. Okay, then we collect the money, and then we recruit people to participate as team members in our project, and we pay them for their stories, for their photography, for their good work. And so the money comes in one door and goes out the other door to the people who are working on these stories.
Yeah. Models come and go. This is such a needed um, service. I'll just call it that. What you're providing is the storytelling is extraordinary, and you have people mirroring community, which I think is another important value here. Um, the journalists, um, do they come together with you? I'm curious about these meetings that you have to decide on stories. I'm
Yeah.
by
Well,
that.
we did have one Zoom. Um, One of the things that when you got 21 people engaged, to you can imagine how difficult it would be to get everybody together at a particular time to have a meeting, and then if you had 21 people, you know, like, on Zoom. It's like that Hollywood Squares thing, I guess, when you see everybody. So that's hard to do. So basically what I do as a kind of the coordinator of all this is I go out and look for families who and I do that through some social service agencies and some contacts that I already had in the neighborhood. I guess I should mention that I started writing about families in 63106 20 years ago. I did a big series for the Post-Dispatch called A Better Place to Grow Up about efforts to revitalize the neighborhoods in 63106. And I already had some contacts, kind of grassroots contacts. They put me in touch with people. I would eventually get a phone number for a family member, and I would conduct an interview over the phone and kind of a preliminary interview to kind of figure out who they are and where they've been in life and what their challenges were. I make a transcript of that interview. And then I would, remember that scene in Mission Impossible? I'm going to be dating us, but when the guy at the beginning, the guy goes through his dossier of people who he might want to assign to this particular Mission Impossible. So I go through my dossier and I pick out the reporter who might be a good person to be involved, and a videographer and a photographer. And then I get in touch with that person and I say, this is the individual. Does this interest you? What do you think? And so that particular reporter, if we have a match, as it were, then the reporter gets in touch with the family and, off to the races doing a story. And then I match the story to a media partner. And so the story I'm doing personally on Kim Daniel, I got St. Louis Public Radio interested in that one. And so they put that story up on its website. And I've Jeanette Cooperman, for instance, who is a well-known writer in St. Louis, one of the best. She's written for St. Louis Magazine, and they were only too happy to have her because she used to be a staff member at St. Louis Magazine, so she obviously a known quantity. And also she used to work at the Riverfront Times, so she's actually covering two families, one for each of those publications. Aisha, of course, works at the Post-Dispatch, so her piece went there, as did one by Stu Durando. So the Post-Dispatch is running two of our stories, and that's kind of how we mix and match and sort. And to reference another television show that goes even further back, you will remember the Ed Sullivan Show, where they had the guy who was spinning plates on sticks. Do you remember that?
Of course I do.
You can actually find that on YouTube. And I'm that guy. I'm keeping all the plates spinning and running around and trying to.
Or a whirling dervish.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, it's very gratifying work to do. I wake up in the morning and I just can't wait to work on one of these stories or make an arrangement with a family. And and of course, with the technology that we have, it makes it easy. And and we don't have to, in some ways, there's no shoe leather journalism for this. We don't get in front of these families. We don't except in some specific, very carefully planned circumstances. We don't go into their home. We don't sit across from them at a table like you would typically do as a reporter. We do this all by phone or by Zoom or FaceTime, and the photographers go out and they mask up and they'll take pictures. And we did have Wiley Price was in a unit with Kim Daniel, the person I was writing about, but staying far enough away from her to be safe.
So let's talk about that distance, or that separation of not being up close. How does the storytelling change, do you think, as a result of working this way versus the old-fashioned way, where you're up close and personal and doing that interview, or doing it on the phone? Of course, that's not up close and personal, but it's different.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that a lot of the storytelling is what makes a good story is that it's intimate, right? And the people that you're interviewing need we need them to tell us things that are sometimes raw and sometimes difficult. And some of us are very come from different places. And some of us, like me, old white guy, look different than the people that we're interviewing. And so you have to establish a kind of a trust and a bond, as soon as you possibly can. And this sometimes, I mean, what helps with Zoom is that you can see each other, right? You can read each other's expressions, and it's really important, as that any journalist knows, that when you're interviewing somebody is to not to be interested and engaged and to be a really good listener and not to judge, because you'll hear things that you say, well, if I were in their position, I might have done it differently, or something like that. And of course, that is a real tell if you're revealing that to people. And so you have to be careful. Now, I'm fortunate in that the team of folks that I'm working with are veterans. They have done this for years and years, most of them, and so they have that going for them. I also have a very diverse team, so there aren't old white guys always doing these interviews or telling these stories, and so that that's helpful as well. Don't feel like we've lost too much from this sort of distance reporting, but of course you never know. That's a sort of a counterfactual. If we were in the room with them, the other thing that I think really helps is that we are not doing a one and done. And so these folks that we're talking with know that we're coming back and that we're caring about them. And I think that has been helpful, especially now that most of us are on our second story, or maybe even done with the second story. We have established, at least in my case, with Kim, a really strong relationship. And the one thing that's neat about Kim, who is she's in her 50s, I believe, so she's at least of my vintage. She's also a strong writer, and so we talk a little bit about that. And so I'm sharing some paragraphs that I'm writing, and I mean, she's a good editor. She's helping me with my work, and so that also creates a nice relationship that is very useful for the storytelling.
It sounds as if that elusive trust factor that we often talk about in communications, that you have established that with those you've covered, this is wonderful. You've established trust among your colleagues in terms of what you're doing, which, those are great synergies that are developing as a result of these products that you're creating. And I think that's fantastic. The trust factor, though, that you have developed with the people you've covered, you can't buy that.
Yeah, there's another factor here. There's another piece of this equation that we haven't yet talked about, and those are the readers and how they regard all of this. And I must say, I mean, we have gotten some pushback in some quarters about how we're doing it. I think some of it is a result of some maybe misunderstanding. But just to give you an example, we put out a story on Facebook, and a few people weighed in to say that essentially that this was I don't think they use these words, but somebody else gave me this term, poverty porn, that we are basically exploiting the people we are writing about to entertain other people with these kinds of stories, where people would read them and say, there but for the grace of God go I, and then go on with their day, right? And what's the utility, what's the usefulness of doing such a story? And and I try to explain, well, number one, we we don't look at it that way, that we are continuing our coverage of these families and to show that they matter in our region. The other thing about these stories is that, or the criticism, which I take to heart and appreciate, is that, do these stories do anything to address what you would call systemic racism? These are individual stories, and so how does an individual story connect to systemic racism, which I think that we all appreciate? This is what needs to be addressed. And what I like to say is that we create a kind of a culture of empathy, or that so people understand how race is lived in America, in our region, how race, how the system impacts people in their everyday lives, so that when policy prescriptions are, put in front of policymakers and voters, that they are more sensitive to why the policy prescription matters, and they might cast their vote, or they might provide support in one way or another. And then one other point in all of this is that we speak of listening to the unheard. And what was interesting about every one of our families so far is that they are very sympathetic, as you might imagine, to Black Lives Matter, but not one of them have gone into the streets to protest. That isn't because they don't think it should be done, but they have so much going on in their lives. They're so beset with issues, taking care of their kids, or dealing with health issues, or whatever, or just simply afraid to be in a crowd because of their health issues. They don't get out there. So I feel like we're performing something of a service by meeting with these folks who are the definition, I think, of unheard, and reporting out their stories.
So maybe in a way you gave me the answer to the question I'm about to ask. So the day that the death of George Floyd, what did you do? Where did you go in the context of BFBF here?
Yeah, so that's why I feel things like that are happening all the time, and that's why I feel like it's so important to keep reporting on these families and keep doing these stories one after another, because we can come back in chapter 2 or chapter 3 and say, this happened out there. How did that impact you in your life? How did that make you feel? Is there anything that you did to respond in some way? And it hits everybody differently, and it leads to questions like, as you know, there's a lot of bad information floating around, conspiracy theories, and stuff that people probably should dismiss. And what we find with our families, that we ask them, what have you heard? How have you heard it? Where did you learn it? And I in my own case with Kim, she is a huge consumer of news, and so the stereotype might be that families in this area don't know which end is up, right? That they're cut off from good information or whatever. And actually, Kim is watching. She's into Reuters, what they're putting out there, and she's on, watching the cable channels avidly, and her news diet is in some ways is even more robust than mine. And then there are other families who are getting their stuff much more from I guess the infotainment side of things, and so they miss things, or they make some assumptions about how testing is going. I think some are more or less conversant with now, as a result of some good work on behalf of some NGOs. There are some testing sites that some are aware of and some are not. Some, I think there's one woman who is in our group of interviewees who says, well, doesn't understand that by masking up, she's not only protecting herself, she's even more so protecting other people. And so she's more fatalistic. She says, well, if I get it, I get it. And, that's somebody that, you can appreciate isn't getting all the information that might be good for her to have. And so the rest of the community needs to know that, both that these folks are resilient and resourceful, and sometimes there are things they don't know and that they need to know.
Yeah, I think the stories you've done so far, they have been of a help perhaps into the future when you go back to these stories. I mean, you spoke about NGA, of course. So that's going to have a huge impact on community there. And, for housing, for school, for everything.
Yeah. The one thing that's interesting about things like that, let's just call it redevelopment. Sometimes it's gentrification or whatever it might be. That has a significant impact on their lives. One of our folks is who we're getting around to writing about just now, actually had to leave her neighborhood. And she's in a unit just outside 63106, and she's dying to get back, okay? Ms. Daniel, the person I'm writing about, feels unsafe. She lives like 2 blocks from where this other person lived. She feels unsafe and just is trying to get out of the neighborhood. She wants to escape. And the reasons are interesting for both of them, why they want to leave or why you would want to come back to Preservation Square, which is the neighborhood that they're in. And it's all part, what's in the mix here that's affecting both of them is the redevelopment of Preservation Square, which is taking a lot longer than was anticipated. And there's some cyclone fencing around part of the neighborhood, which not only is unattractive, it just, sends a bad signal that, there's not something happening there that should. And of course, then there's that NGA site, which is acres and acres that, that's going to happen. And that's going to have a huge impact that you can predict some of it, but some of it you just don't know how it'll go.
Yeah. Do you use Twitter as a scanning device, for instance, for what's going on in the area? Of course, Twitter changed when Ferguson blew up several years ago. Twitter changed the face of journalism in many ways.
Yes. I would say that I'm not a particularly sophisticated consumer of Twitter. I mean, we put our stories out there, and I kind of check in on it when I know that, like, let's just say there's a protest going on. I can follow along in real time on Twitter, better maybe than Facebook. I find that many of the people that we're writing about use Facebook a lot. And so we can go sometimes in terms of figuring out who our participants are, our families. You can find out a lot about them through Facebook, what they're putting up, what they put up over years, and funny, interesting stuff that can be useful when you do your interviews. And also it's a source of photographs for us to use with their permission, of course. So that not only do we have the contemporaneous photos, which are necessarily limited. I mean, it's basically taking pictures of them in their homes or near their homes because they're not out and about. And so, we could take the case of Tyra, the woman that Aisha wrote about. She has pictures of her kids and when they were teeny tiny, and I think there might even be pictures of her when she was in high school, and that kind of thing. So that's the social media part of this is, of course, when I was working in this neighborhood 20 years ago, you didn't have that, and you could find out things about people in other ways, but mostly you had to ask them. Now you can find, everybody's got a
verification,
a history out there. which has good and bad things, but
Resources
um,
are abundant, yes. And then you have to be able to discern which are legitimate.
yeah, I'll tell you one other funny kind of thing. I don't know that it's actually worked that well for me, but one thing I noticed is I would ride my bike through 63106 just to kind of get the lay of the land and see what's there. And a there are probably more churches in 63106 than there are habitable single family homes.
Wow.
And I wrote down the names of some of those churches, and I went on Facebook to look them up, and I've seen that they've got um, services, Zoom services, essentially, and or Facebook Live services, and so I could go on and watch their service, and then every so often, um, as you're probably aware, you can, as a participant, write something down and say, praise the Lord, or way to go, Rev, or whatever like that. And then their Facebook handle is there. And then I can go and try to friend them on Facebook and see if they might be interested in participating in the project. And that's a little bit of cyber stalking, I think, with good intentions. And of course, nobody has to friend me or talk to me. And what was also interesting to me is that when I would go look at their Facebook profiles, we would have some friends in common. Who knew that I would have a friend in common with somebody who's attending church in 63106? It kind of made me happy about that. That I have that I have a network that's that diverse.
Yeah. You seem very happy with what you're doing, and it's so obvious. You're living and breathing this, and it's really just a pleasure to see this your not-for-profit unfold and do this hyper-local work, essentially.
Right.
That's unusual, and if you look back on this period right now, because that's what we were covering for this press club series, is the COVID, and then the overlay, of course, of the protests and the civil unrest. If you look back on this, a couple of years, what would be the highlights for you? In terms of what you're doing here.
Well, I guess just in personally, I'm not a bread maker, but you have to start with something, right? There's a little starter
Yes,
thing
starter.
that you may know more.
Sourdough starter.
Okay, so it's so gratifying to have just started with that little starter package, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and then to be able to pull a loaf out of the oven. Now about every couple of weeks we have a story appearing in one of our media partners and getting these wonderful pieces out there and getting nice feedback from everybody. So that, for me personally, that's the gratifying thing. I cannot wait to get out of bed in the morning and work on this thing, and I get it gets about 11 o'clock or midnight, and I'm like I'm doing something, I'm putting something up on the website, and I'm thinking, oh, do I really have to go to bed now, because I want to do this one more thing. And then sort of right in the middle of that thought, my chin hits my chest because I've fallen asleep as I'm thinking this, and then I wake up and I think, well, I better go to bed so I can get up early the next morning and do what I need to do. I'm totally energized by it. It's great, and it's always good to feel like, and I think I can speak for everybody who's participating in the project, that in this, I don't know, something close to a dystopia, that there's actually something that we can do and to be helpful in some way, and it accesses the skills that we already have, and then it also we can learn new things as well. I mean, that's the life, in all of its best circumstances, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Tremendous public service is what it is.
I should mention that the Press Club has provided its financial support to the project, and we're grateful for that. And I don't, and so many others as well. And if you go to our website, before Ferguson, beyondferguson.org, you can find all the other people who are backing the project, including I guess our greatest benefactor is the Pulitzer Center. So I should mention them as well.
A lovely partnership. I wish you well. I love seeing what you're doing. I'm very much myself a proponent of localism, and however we can do that, but with such expert, what a team, Dick, you've put together. It's great. Anyway,
Thank you.
Appreciate on behalf of the St. Louis Press Club, appreciate your time and continued energy and good wishes to you. Thank you.